Go ahead.
And then look at me.
All right, welcome to proper tree care practices for small acreage landowners in Colorado. Today we're going to have Vince Urbina from the Colorado State Forest Service speak to us. And Vince has been working in the degree of forestry since 1973. He's been a certified arborist since 1999. And Vince has got a lot of experience and talks to Colorado Master Gardeners and a lot of other groups. So this should be a great presentation by Vince today. We'll get a couple things out of the way real quick. We want to assess your knowledge of tree care practices. And if you go ahead and click on the box if you have some knowledge or a little bit or not very much at all. And we'll give a minute for everybody to submit their response on this. Vince is also going to field questions during the webinar today. So if you have questions, go ahead and type them in the chat box. And we'll give Vince a hand with making sure he's able to answer those questions as we go through the process. And then at the end, there should be some extra time so that we can go over the questions, additional questions at the end. Looks like we're probably about ready to go ahead and get started. So, Vince, I'll turn it over to you. Go ahead and get started whenever you're ready.
Okay. Like John said, I would prefer to have this presentation with your questions, answer your questions, and I'll just move on. So I'll go at it sort of slow and methodically so that we can give people an opportunity to ask questions. There are numerous types of growing stock available. I mean, you can get these at the local market, you can get them at the hardware store, you can get them at the big box stores, and lo and behold, you can also get them at nurseries. So this is what you can expect when you go out looking for planting material. At the top, that's bud grafted trees. 46% of the trees that you probably will be looking at are bud grafted trees. Some good examples of bud grafted trees would be spring snow crabapple, skyline honey locust. They have names like that, radiant crabapple. Those are all good examples of bud grafted trees. Then there are seedlings. About 32% of the nursery stock that you can buy are seedling trees. Ponderosa pine is a good example. Colorado blue spruce is another good example. And then there are rooted cuttings. So 20% of the nursery stock that you may encounter is going to be a rooted cutting. Usually poplars and willows are good examples of rooted cuttings. And then finally, collected native trees. Good examples of that would be aspen and pinyon pine. So those are the types of nursery stock that are available out there. Here's a skyline honey locust, one of my favorite trees for planting. Very uniform, symmetrical. At the bottom of that slide, you'll see the little phrase, right tree, right place, right purpose. It's absolutely critical that you follow that when you go out and buy nursery stock. So as you scope out your landscape, look up and see what's up above ahead, because you don't want a tall tree if there happens to be overhead power lines. So remember that as we go through this: right tree, right place, right purpose. Some of my favorite trees are the oaks, English oak, swamp white oak, bur oak, all good trees for Colorado. Lower elevations, probably below 6,000 feet. Up above that, we can plant gamble oak, which is a native tree. So those are really good examples of trees that would work here. Austrian pine, very good tree. If you happen to be in the higher mountains where the soils are a little bit more neutral in their chemical makeup, then you can plant ponderosa pine, pinyon pine. But down low, Austrian pine's a really good choice. It's really important that you match the tree to the site here. You can see these gorgeous Colorado blue spruce planted right next to the house. There's no way that those two can work out. Those are gorgeous trees, and the only solution is to just take them out. So, right tree, right place, right purpose. Don't forget that. It's really important. By state law, the Colorado Department of Agriculture has a Nursery Act. You can see the statute listed up there at the top of the screen. It's really important that you get the right size ball on the tree. You can see there on the left, those are multi-stem aspens, and the ball on those trees is just inadequate. Those trees are going to be stressed at best. And then on the right-hand side, you see a tree, balled and burlap, with the right size ball for the correct caliper. Container plants. The bulk of the plants that we have available to us are grown in containers. And it's really important that you pick out a container plant that has roots that are growing to the edge of the container, but they're not circling. Because if they're circling, there's a very good chance that they'll just continue that pattern as they get older, and then you end up with a tree or a shrub that has girdling roots on it. So it's really important that you check out the container. Make sure that there are no circling or girdling roots in the container. If they're just barely touching, you can take a utility knife and see, as that picture there on the left, you can see where they're cutting the roots. You can cut the roots to break up that pattern, because once those roots start that pattern, they continue that for the life of the plant. So it's really important that you get good containers without girdling roots. Here's the USDA Plant Hardiness Zone Map. Now, I put Colorado highlighted in there because that is a brand new thing. The USDA updated that plant hardiness zone map, and you can see Colorado in there. The resolution is horrible, and I apologize for that. But you can see a website there, planthardiness.ars.usda.gov. What you can do is you can go on that site, and then you can type in your zip code, and it'll tell you what plant hardiness zone you're in. I thought that's pretty handy. So then you can go to the local plant source, and you can tell them, hey, I'm in plant hardiness zone 6. And they can tell you what plants will work in that zone, in that particular zone. It's absolutely critical that you know your soil. And probably the best way to get that is to get a soil test, so they can tell you what the texture is, they can tell you the pH, and then you can match the tree to the soil. You can see this tree, although it's a good tree for a lot of places, it's not a good tree for this site. It's exhibiting what we call chlorosis. And so what that means is this tree is not getting the particular mineral nutrient that it needs to have a green leaf. And therefore we have a tree that's mismatched to the site, and the solution is not to pour chemicals at it and to do that kind of thing, because that's not going to solve the problem. So know your soil so that you can match the tree to the site. Now I'm going to get into planting. There's a right way to plant and there's a wrong way to plant. And this example here shows a root ball. This happens to be a balled and burlap deciduous tree, most likely. And if you'll notice that the root ball is planted on firm soil there at the bottom. So there's no little mound of soil or no little mound of rocks, or there's no platform. It's on native soil. And it's planted a little bit high. It's a good idea to plant high in Colorado because our soils are usually clay, and that can present problems down the road if you plant too deep. Notice that the size of the hole is 2 times the diameter, and there's a reason for that. What you want to do is you want to loosen up that soil, and then that gives that tree, those tree roots, an opportunity to grow out into the soil. And then you'll see here there's also mulch put up. When you mulch the tree, make sure that you don't put mulch around the tree, close to the tree. I have some pictures coming up that'll show you that. Okay. Here's an example of planting balled and burlap trees in turf. Now the holes, notice on the right-hand side, the hole is overdug. That way you can roll that ball in there, burlap, wire basket, twine and all. And then you get it positioned, and then you take off the top half of the basket. Take off that twine that's growing up around, that's been put around the stem, and then you can cut off that burlap, and then you can plant. I have a couple of questions. Let me see what they are here. This question says, thanks for doing this. As I contemplate getting involved in a little propagation of my own, preferably using material from my land, are there some high-level characteristics of species that would help me identify the best propagation method by species, preferably visually or by sight? Seedling versus rooted cutting, bud graft, etc. If you're collecting trees from your own site, the best way to do that would be probably to ball those trees. If you're going to propagate those trees, then most likely the best way is going to be seed. And it depends on the type of tree we're talking about. If we're talking about spruces and pines and piñons, you can collect seed from those, and then you can propagate those. If you're talking about poplars and willows, you can propagate those from hardwood cuttings, except for aspen. Aspen would be the exception. You probably with aspen, you probably want to propagate those from root cuttings. Okay, hopefully I answered that question. Another question, do you recommend adding any fertilizers at planting? I am not a proponent of fertilizers. I just have seen it abused too much, and therefore, as a result, I don't recommend fertilizers. What I do recommend, though, is if you're going to be planting trees in your yard and you have the opportunity, then I would recommend, if you feel the need to amend the soil, I would recommend that you amend the site, not the hole, because it won't be long before those roots are growing out into the native material, and all that amendment that went back into the hole will be of no use. Another question, do local county co-op extension offices offer soil testing through a lab at CSU at Fort Collins? As far as I know, that's true. Local CSU extension offices either have access to the soil testing lab in Fort Collins or local. Okay, let's continue on. Keep those questions coming. Container plants. It's really important. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this slide. It's really important that you understand where the roots are in the containers. Sometimes containers are planted too deep, and therefore you don't end up planting the tree in the right depth. So you notice on the top left it says root collar. We need to have that root collar at the soil line. See where those roots are below the dotted line that says ground level? It's really critical. That container plant there, they removed, I don't know, 2-3 inches off the top of that plant before they even got to the roots. And then the picture on the right shows a tree that was planted too deep. That's a real problem with planting trees in Colorado. Trees that are planted too deep, they suffer oxygen starvation, and they stresses them, and all kinds of problems come as a result of stress. I have a question. It says, how about use of polymers in the hole for seedlings? The Colorado State Forest Service sells seedling trees and shrubs, and they use polymer in that application, planting bare root. I've seen it done. It can be effective. The use of polymers can be effective for planting and then also for adding into the hole. The thing to remember about polymers is if you dig a hole that's, say, a foot in diameter and you fill it full of polymer at the right level, at the right amount, in 2 years the roots are going to be beyond that hole. So the polymer won't have a long-term effect. It's really important in Colorado. Give trees all the water they need. I recommend at planting that you put a little, you can see some diagrams, some pictures here of trees with berms around them to contain the water. It's a good idea for up to 2 years to do that so that you can take advantage of getting all the water on the tree roots. And then beyond that, the trees should be on their own. So give the tree all the water it needs. I recommend to people all the time, spend time in your landscape, get to know what's going to make your tree happy. Because when you know what makes your tree happy, then you can have a tree for a long time. So let's go through some principles of tree watering here. Keep in mind the container plants get daily irrigation at the nursery. So if you put that container plant in your landscape, it's used to daily water. So keep that in mind. Make sure that you provide For container plants come with 100% of their roots, so you got to make sure that you give those plants all the water they need. I like mulching trees for lots of reasons. Mulch to conserve water, to control weeds, and most importantly in my mind to keep the grass away. Trees and grass don't usually mix very well. Trees can be outcompeted by grass all the time, and we know the damage that can happen from lawnmowers and string trimmers and all kinds of things that can interfere with bark. And bark is it's just as important as the leaves are. So if we end up dinging and nicking the bark with the lawnmowers and string trimmers, then it's counterproductive, and we put the tree under stress, and 9 times out of 10 that tree is going to die over time. Bald and burlap trees come with only 20 to 30% of their original root system. So at first they need less water than container plants, but they do need supplemental water. And then finally, the thing that I like most importantly, water trees deeply. We want to get that soil profile wet down about 16 inches so we can get the water to the roots, and then water infrequently. We water our grass frequently. We don't water trees frequently, but we water them deeply. And then I recommend that you spend time in your landscape and then learn from the tree, learn what makes that tree happy, and then you'll get the maximum benefit out of your landscape. Mulching. I like mulch. Apply a 3-inch thick layer of mulch out as far as you can get away with. I like to see out to the drip line. You'll see the picture of this tree here in the left. If you take your plumb bob and you go to the outermost branch and you let that plumb bob hit to the bottom, that's the drip line. So if you can cover the drip line with mulch, you'll benefit your tree. I guarantee it. Mulch conserves water, and I think probably the best thing for me is it eliminates mower and string timber damage. And then I have another question. Let me do this last point. It's really important that you keep your mulch away from the root collar. That's absolutely critical, because you can get decay, you can get that mulch will build up moisture around the root collar, and that's counterproductive. I have another question. It says, I have some pine seeds. How deep do I bury the seeds so they can grow the best way possible? A good rule of thumb with all seeds is to take the diameter of the seed and say it's a 1/4 inch. Cover it with a 1/4 inch of media. Say the trees or the seeds you're using are acorns and they're a 1/2 inch in diameter. Then cover those seeds with a 1/2 inch of media. Just a good rule of thumb. This publication just came out. You'll see it says Green Code Tree Planting Recommendations. What I like about this publication, you can download it from this site, www.greencode.org. What I like about this publication is all of these industries got together. The Associated Landscape Contractors of Colorado, the American Society of Landscape Architects, the nurserymen, CSU, municipal arborists, the ISA chapter, Rocky Mountain chapter of ISA. They all got together and they put their heads together and they figured out, okay, what can we agree on? On planting, on baskets, on staking, on establishment and water, on mulch, on pruning, trunk protection, staking, fertilization. They all got together and they came to a consensus, and this publication is probably the first in many publications that are going to come your way that will give you some guidance on what you can do that would be accepted by industry, by all of these various industries. You can download it from this site. Go to that greencode.org and click under resources, and it's at the top of that list, and you can see what the industry standards are in regards to selecting, planting, and caring for trees. I like this publication a lot. It just came out this winter. Pruning, and I'm going to throw this caution in there. I prune trees all the time. That's kind of what I enjoy doing. But if I work off the ground, if I'm using a chainsaw, or if I need to remove the tree, this work needs to be done by somebody who is licensed and insured. Preferably, they're certified, ISA certified arborists. So what you can do is you can go to the International Society of Arboriculture. There's a website there for you, www.treesaregood.org, and you can find a tree service in your area. If you happen to be in the city of Grand Junction, the Grand Junction City Forestry Department posts their list of licensed arborists on their website. A lot of other cities, larger cities, do the same thing. So I would encourage you, if you're going to be leaving the ground, get a professional. I'm going to get into pruning now. Sometimes people say, well, when should I prune? Right now is a really good time to prune. And the reason is, if you can see this picture on the left, this is the same tree, left and right. You can see the structure. You can see problems. And so I like pruning right now because I can see problems. I can see where there's a broken branch. I can see where branches are rubbing or touching. I can see where branches are going to be growing into, a desirable thing down the road, and I can take them out now when they're young. So I like pruning right now. But you can also prune in the summertime. There's a time when I don't like pruning. I don't like pruning when the trees are just breaking bud, because they're at their most weakest point. They're using all that stored energy to push out those new buds and new leaves, and so they're weak at that time. I don't like pruning then. I also don't like pruning in the fall. In the fall, when it's time, we're getting to days of frost, cold temperatures, the leaves are starting to change color. I don't like pruning then because it's time for trees to go to bed. And so those are the 2 times of year I don't like pruning. Every other time of year I can prune, and it's always a good idea to prune. I'm going to use 2 terms here that I'll refer to in these upcoming slides: branch bark ridge and collar, branch collar. The tree on the left is a real good example of a collar. You can see as the branch comes out, I'm pointing with my cursor, as the branch comes into this swollen area, right there is the branch collar. That's where you want to prune. There's the branch bark ridge, there's the branch collar. Not every tree shows the branch collar as well as this particular example. Okay, on the right, you can see this is a cutaway of a tree. Here's a dead branch, and you can see internally where there's a bunch of staining. So what's happening inside the tree is walling off that dead branch chemically. And so there's a branch protection zone right in here. And so by making a flush cut, there's a little no here by this line, by making this flush cut, you break that branch protection zone. And you predispose that part of the tree to maybe some introduction of decay fungi. And so here's the branch collar, there's the branch bark ridge, here's where you make your cut, outside the branch collar. I know that's probably going to generate some questions. So on this example, here's an aspen. Aspen's showing us this branch bark ridge right there. So the person who made these cuts, that's a very good cut. Right at the collar, here's another good cut, here's another good cut. You don't want to make flush cuts because you're making the wound bigger than it needs to be. So remember the branch bark ridge and the branch collar. Okay, here's an example, a diagram that shows all of those. Branch bark ridge, follow my cursor there. On this particular seed, we're seeing a branch collar. We're also seeing a branch collar. So this diagram talks about the 3-step method for cutting large branches. So go out about 6-8 inches, make your first cut from the underside, up about 1/3 to 1/2 of the way. Then go to the top of the branch and further out on the branch, make another cut that comes down, and this thing will break away, and then you're left with a little stub, and you can remove the final stub at the branch collar. So remember that. First cut underneath, Next cut, outside and from the top. Let the weight of that branch break, and then you're left with a little stub, and you make your final cut. That's the three-step process. Here's what happened when you don't follow the three-step process. Here's the diagram on the left. 1, 2, 3. This person started. Here's a honey locust it's a street tree, honey locust. This person started making the cut on the upside of this branch. It was a large branch, probably looks like about 5-6 inches. As the weight of the branch was no longer being able to support by the wood that was attached, when the weight finally gave way, it ripped the bark all the way down. That could have been avoided by using this three-step method here on the left. I have a question. How common is infection during pruning? If you cut closer, wouldn't you have a smaller knot and faster recovery? Okay. How common is infection during pruning? There's one for sure that I know of, fire blight. Fire blight is a bacteria that gets on all trees in the rose family. So that would be apple, that would be mountain ash, those are two good. Crabapple are all susceptible to fire blight. If your tree has fire blight, it's possible for you to reinfect your tree by carrying that bacteria to another part of the tree that may be not infected. So yes, it is possible to do that. I recommend that if you have a tree with fire blight, that you learn about fire blight from wherever source, the internet, extension, local nursery. Learn about fire blight so that you know where the tree is infected and where it is not, and then you can make the right cut. If you're going to disinfect your pruning tools, I like using alcohol. And so the process of sterilization on the pruners with alcohol is the alcohol, as it dries up, it dries up the spores. I don't like using bleach. Bleach is also another disinfectant because the bleach is pretty corrosive on pruning material. So it's important, if you know that you have an infected tree, probably with fire blight would be the best example, that you need to learn about fire blight, and then also it is possible to reinfect. So you need to learn as much as you can about it so you know when to make the timing of your cut. The second part of that question is, if you cut closer, wouldn't you have a smaller knot and faster recovery? I'm going to show you some pictures of that at the end of this that will answer that question. Good questions. Never, ever top trees. It's just bad business. It's bad business for the tree. It's bad business for the community. Just don't ever do it. Here's a pretty radical example of a top tree. What happens when you top a tree is the tree wants to replace what you just removed. So you have buds growing up underneath the bark called adventitious buds that sprout as a result of this topping cut, and that's what you can see. That's sometimes called epicormic branching. Those are adventitious buds that broke because the tree was topped and it wanted to replace what was removed. And so invariably those branches are poorly, weakly attached, and there's a chance that come a windstorm or the weight of the branch as it gets bigger, it'll fail because the branch is poorly attached. Over here on the right-hand side, you can see example, a cutaway of a branch, actually a dissected branch that was topped. And if you can see, follow my cursor here, you can see where that is decayed. That is a decay fungus that has entered the tree because you've created this large wound. So topping is just a bad thing. Don't ever, I hear people say all the time, well, my tree is too tall. Well, there's a right way to reduce the height of a tree, and topping is not the way to do it. Okay, here's answering that question about pruning cuts. Here are, this is a hackberry tree, a young hackberry tree growing on a parkway. And you can see the diameter of these branch cuts is about, the biggest one is probably 1 inch in diameter. We pruned these trees, you notice that you can see the leaves, it was pruned in the summertime. It was pruned because the branches were too low, probably affecting the pedestrian safety, and so they needed to lift the tree up. I'm a proponent of small, appropriate cuts. So this tree was pruned in July 2001. Go to the next slide. There's August 2002. The next slide, October 2003. The branch cuts are completely closed. The tree does not heal, it closes. And so that's what happens. I'm a proponent of making small, appropriate cuts. And you can see that this was done in the summertime. Okay, this is I think my last slide. Conifers, really important to have a central leader on conifers. This is a Colorado blue spruce. Blue spruce when they're young trees. You can see this person's finger pointing here. Spruces when they're young, a lot of times will throw two tops. Don't know why, they just do. Both of these tops are about the same size. They can't coexist. We need to establish one leader. So what I like to do is I like to pick the straightest and the strongest. So look at this one here on the left. Which to you looks like the straightest and which looks the strongest? Remove that weaker one and then you have one leader. On Austrian pine, ponderosa pine, Scotch pine, Colorado blue spruce, any of the other spruces that you might be planting, it's really important that you have a strong central leader, especially when they're young. If you don't deal with that, what happens is those two compete, and in time, one of them will fail, and then you'll end up with a pretty bad wound. Okay.
There's a question.
That was my last slide. Okay, the question is, how can you tell which leader is the strongest? Well, in this example, usually the leader is going to have a bigger girth. It's going to be fatter, more robust. But in this example, they were pretty close to the tide. But I wanted to get the straightest one. And I figured the one on the right was the straightest and the strongest, and then I removed the competition. I have another question. How about long established pines that have two leaders? Long established. I guess my question is, how long is that? If the branch is 2 inches, go for it. If the branch is 3 inches, you're probably still good. But when it starts getting bigger than that, then the hole that you're left with as a result of the pruning may be objectionable. So I tell people all the time, you got to spend time in your landscape. You got to spot those problems early and deal with them when they're young. And here's another one. Some of my trees are hurting badly. One of the oaks, about 8 to 10 feet high, has a few small twigs for branches that are only remaining living material on the tree. What are some of the signs we would use to determine the decision to give up and pull the tree out and replace with something else? Can badly hurt or badly planted trees recover and survive? I've been accused of being callous. If the trees and the shrubs aren't doing what you want, then I suggest you start over. And get a tree that's vigorous. Get a tree at the source wherever you go, whether it's a nursery or one of the big box stores. Get a tree that's vigorous. Look at the root system, make sure they're not circling. Use the directions that I gave you for planting the tree. Water appropriately. Watch the tree and make sure that you're staying on top of the pruning. And then sometimes it's best just to start over. And then, can badly hurt or badly planted trees recover and survive? Probably 75% of the time, no. Here's another question. I planted 30 white fir and 30 Scotch pines last year into pots. They were seedlings that I purchased. I lost 90% of the white fir and only 20% of the Scotch. Could I have overwatered them without adequate drainage in the pots? Yes. That's really important in media, in container media, that you have air. So you couldn't just go out into the garden and take some garden soil, throw it into a pot. plant a tree in it and expect it to survive and or thrive. You need potting soil. Potting soil has large particles and small particles. It's really important that you have air in the container meters. So yeah, it's very possible that you overwatered and actually the trees probably drowned. Question: what can one do with young trees in high winds above 8,000 feet? I'm assuming that these are young trees. If they're young trees, you can protect them from the wind. You can deflect the wind, but at some point in time, they're going to have to be out on their own. Hopefully you're planting trees that are adapted to your area, preferably natives, because those are the ones that are probably going to perform the best over the longest period of time.
Let me add to that a little bit too. We recently in our small acreage newsletter put out a gentleman in North Park who's been working with some tree shading and other protection devices on his forest that you can use for when you're planting fresh tree seedlings. So maybe take a look at our website and our small acreage newsletter to get a little information on potential structures that you could utilize to protect your seedlings when they're first planted.
Question: my landscape company sells me hard on oil treatments. Early season dormant oil treatment, are these treatments of any value to the tree? I guess my answer to that question is, what's the oil treatment for? Dormant oil is usually very good for controlling leaf-sucking insects, especially aphids, because they lay their eggs on the tree. And so that's a very good one. Caterpillars also. But I guess to answer that question correctly is I need to know what the target insect is. Spraying on dormant oil just to be spraying it on because your landscape company says to do so may not be the best use of your money. Here's a question: what would be the proper procedure for digging up and replanting fruit trees? You can do that if they're small. I used to ball trees all the time, and you can even bare root trees, but they have to be pretty small. So if you're dealing with trees that are probably inch and a half, I would try to get as much of the root system as you can. Bare root, right now is when you would do it. And then I would move them to the place where they're going to be, plant them at the right depth, try to get as much of the root system as you possibly can. Question: when you have moth kill on central top leader, was I correct in moving two in the next row to develop a new leader? Sure, you can develop a new leader. I'm assuming you're talking pine tip moth. Pine tip moth affects terminals. It's not going to go away. Make sure you deal with the pine tip moth. If you make a new leader, there's a very good chance that pine tip moth will be back. Preventative: no present sign of insects. I am not a proponent of spraying indiscriminately. You need to know the target insect. If the insect is a borer, you need to put on a borer control, and probably you're going to want to go with a commercial applicator. If it's something like aphids, you can use dormant oil. You can use contact. You can use soap on aphids. There's a lot of things you can use on aphids because they're soft body. But I think the trick is, what are we going after? You're going to identify what is the target insect. Is it bark beetles? Is it borers? Is it caterpillars? And then use the appropriate spray. There are enough people out there that can give you that information. When is the proper time to plant trees? If you go back 40, 50 years ago, the only trees you could get were bare root and bald and burlap. And you could only plant bare roots in a small window in the spring. You could plant bald and burlap kind of all summer long. With container plants, we expanded the window that we could plant trees. So we can, where I live in Grand Junction, we can plant 8 months out of the year. Easy. It's all about soil temperature. If the soil is warm, then you can plant trees. At some point in time, if you put a tree in a hole, it's not going to grow any because it's wintertime. But I could say, depends on what you're using. A bare root, small window; bald and burlap, bigger window; container plants, the biggest window. Question: what is the proper way to top a tree? There is no proper way to top a tree. Topping is not a word that I would use for pruning. Topping is not pruning. If we're talking crown reduction, that's different. And there is a way to do crown reduction. And I kind of have to show you, I don't have a picture of a large tree being pruned, But crown reduction, if you can visualize, what you want to do is you want to prune to a branch growing in the direction that you want, that's at least 1/3 to 1/2 of the diameter of the one you're just taking off. That's reduction pruning. Topping is not something I would ever recommend.
We got a few minutes for some more questions. If anybody out there has some more, I'd be happy to type those in and take a look at what you got. I want to thank Vince for coming on today, and we can get you links to Vince's email address and mine as well. I'm with Extension. My name is John Rizza, so john.rizza@colostate.edu can get you my email, and I can get you in touch with Vince. I'm also a certified arborist and been in forestry industry for quite some time, so happy to answer some questions, and I'm sure Vince is happy to answer some questions for you, and we can point you in the right direction for other folks in your area who can help you out.
My email address is vince, vince.urbina, urbina, @colostate.edu, just like John Rizza's.
Looks like we might have a couple more questions coming in here, so we'll hold tight for just a minute. I also want to emphasize the point of if you are planting new trees, whether they be seedlings or bare root or containerized, to understand the soils that you have. And doing a soil test before you plant those trees is a really good idea to ensure that you're able to spend your money wisely and your investment is not, is going to be preserved for the long run if you are putting these trees in. And again, as Vince mentioned earlier, we can help you get some soil tests done on your site and get you designed the right species mix for your property so that we can ensure your seedlings are doing what they need to do to grow healthy on your property.
I think the best advice I can give anybody would be the number one problem that we see in landscapes today are trees planted too deep. So it's really critical that you identify where those top roots are, whether they are in the ball or in the container, and get that tree planted at the correct depth. Because if you don't, you're creating problems down the road. Here's a question. Got a forest of fairly large trees in addition to landscape style planting. Lots of dead wood on the big trees. Must this be removed urgently or can they leave to fall naturally? Here's a good example. Ponderosa pine. Ponderosa pine is self-pruning. It lifts itself up. So you'll see dead branches in ponderosa pine. Go ahead and take those off. It's important that you not flush cut them. Identify what that branch collar is, but you can always take out dead wood any time of year. Here's a question, how much is a soil test? I don't know that answer.
The soil test is about $20, and it really depends on what lab we end up going with and where you're at, but they're approximately $20 and really easy to collect, dry that out, get that packaged up and sent off. And again, your local office, wherever you're located at, your extension office can help you with that. Lead time is anywhere from 10 days to a month to get the results back. And what they'll do is give you what's in the soil and some recommendations. So you give them as much information as possible when we send those in. And like I said, we can help you get those conducted on your site.
A soil test is a very good investment. I would recommend them highly.
Save you a lot of money in the long run doing a little planning early on.
Question, when you are planting a windbreak, mulch isn't a good cost option. Is there anything else that can be used to surround these tree bases? Well, the State Forest Service in a lot of locations will sell a landscape fabric that can serve as sort of a protection and or weed and grass abatement. I agree that it's probably not going to be cost effective, but if you're not going to be using string trimmers around these trees, then I just would recommend you mow the grass down and try to keep it short so it's not as competitive. Question. I'm a student at CSU and my major is forestry. What are the best tips to help when I planted trees and how to take good care of them throughout their lives? Plant them at the right depth. That's the best tip I can give you. Match the tree to the site. Right tree, right place, right purpose. Those are real good rules of thumb.
Got a few minutes for some other questions if anybody has them.
You know, I'm doing a pruning workshop in Holly on March the 26th. I'm doing another pruning workshop in La Junta on March the 27th.
So we got some good workshops coming up, and there's definitely some Colorado Master Gardener related classes coming up this summer. So yeah, let's go ahead and see what you guys learned today. We'll pull up another poll if you'd take a second to just click on the appropriate box and what you learned today. Again, this stuff is going to be online, and we'll have them recorded on our website, so take a look at that. And just to mention that we have some more webinars coming up. We'll provide email links for the link to this webinar and the others on that. And we hope you guys will end up joining us for some more webinars related to forestry and small acreages. So again, if you have any other questions, don't hesitate to shoot an email. My contact information is also on our small acreage website, and we're happy to help you guys out. And I want to thank Vince again for conducting this webinar today. Appreciate it, Vince.
My pleasure.
And hopefully we get some more of these here pretty quick, and you guys can take a look at them. Give us a couple days. We'll have this posted online before you know it. So thanks very much for joining us today.